Okay, let me quickly share my screen. Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. At Northeastern, uh, just, we believe in supporting our students not just during their time here, but long after. Today, we have gathered to turn aspiring entrepreneurs' dream into reality in the land of opportunity like the state. It's our goal to ensure every aspiring entrepreneur can achieve their dream. To make this journey smoother, we have fortunate to have two exceptional attorneys with us, Lena and Rohan. Lena is Northeastern alumni of 2010, bring over 15 years of expertise in H1, O1, and L1 visa matters. Tonight, she will guide us through which visas are crucial for sustaining your venture in the States. And then we have Rohan. Rohan is 2021 graduate. He is a member of Desmos Corporate Practice Group, and his expertise lies under corporate formation, governance, intellectual property, and so more. It's our privilege to have both of you today with us. And I will request Lena to take over.
Thank you, Helly, so much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm going to now share my screen over here. So I'm going to be discussing some U.S. immigration options for entrepreneurs as best as I can. I know that you all have different backgrounds or familiarity with the visa process, so I'm going to try to be able to cater to everyone a little bit and give some background, but also go into some details as well. My roadmap for this evening will be just first some general guidelines, then going over some both visas and green card options that entrepreneurs can pursue, as well as discuss some of the current trends at the moment. I mean, things are always changing, and I know it's so stressful, so we're with you all throughout this whole process. So moving on to some of the details, obviously that a non-immigrant visa means that you maintain your residence abroad and that you're in the US for a temporary period. And we, some of the common visa types, we call them hello, we have the H's, the E's, the L's, the O's, as well as other ones that I'll be discussing as well. So you obviously already know that there's no specific visa for entrepreneurs like a startup visa, which many countries have. Unfortunately, we haven't had one yet. You shouldn't work outside the bounds of your visa classification. It's a violation of status. I know that the International Student Office is very good at giving you guidelines and advice on that. You can form a company and have a hobby on any visa. I think the issue is at what point is it work and at what point is it a hobby or just setting it up or thinking or researching and dreaming. There's some gray area there, but we obviously recommend that you be very conservative and maintain your status and not incur any visa violations. Especially now, everything is so public and everything is so online. I would also caution to be careful what you post and what your activities are online, or even what you do on LinkedIn, because anyone can any USCIS officer can go on there and see what you're posting, and so you want to just be careful about that. So some of the options that we have for entrepreneurs, I have a whole list here of a lot of common visa options, and the ones that are bolded are the ones I'm going to be going over specifically. They're all visas except for entrepreneur parole, which is technically it's not a visa. It's just you're able to stay here for a certain period of time. They parole you in. Not that many people have applied for this, I think the requirements are very high, but they all have positives, negatives, gray areas. So I'm going to do my best to go over those with you today. So starting with the B1 business visitor visa, it's just meant to be a short-term visit. So if you are abroad and you want to come here to have meeting, conference, some kind of a training, it's meant to be a short-term visa. People sometimes say, but it says that you can be here for months on this B1. Well, I don't know how you would try to argue that you're not working if it's not a work visa. They don't want you to be working on the visa. So obviously there is some gray area there, but it's really just supposed to be for a short visit, meeting with people, not doing, official work. Probably the most useful visa, if you do qualify for it, is the E1 or especially the E2 investor visa. The caveat with this, though, is that you must be a citizen of a treaty country, and not all countries have a treaty with the US. There's over 70 of them, and you can either apply directly at the US consulate for this, or you can mail a change of status application without leaving the US. And we usually recommend that you just apply at the consulate, because even if you do the change of status here, you would still, if you leave the country and travel and want to re-enter, you would still need to go to the consulate anyway. So it's better to just apply once rather than twice. But this visa, the E1 and the E2 are slightly different. And I have some images here for the different countries that we have treaties with. Obviously, some big countries are not listed. We don't have Brazil, we don't have India, we don't have China. We also don't have Portugal, which is, the country my family hails from. But the E1, which is not as commonly used, other than having to be a citizen of the treaty country, you have to say that you're carrying on substantial trade, carry on principal trade between the US and the treaty country. So you have to exchange goods, services, international banking, insurance, transportation, tourism. I know people tend to do the E2 more, but just to give an example of an E1 that we've done, it was for an electronic device that they wanted to sell here and set up. They had a company, I think it was in Switzerland, and they wanted to set up a company here, and they sent someone here on an E1 to sell this device here and to do that. You have to engage in duties of an executive or supervisory character, or employed in a lesser capacity, but you have to have special qualifications. So they won't just send anyone. They really want someone that is on a managerial, high level, to be coming in on that visa. The E2 investor visa is what we deal with the most, I would say, in terms of people starting companies. You have to have invested or be actively in the process of investing a substantial amount of capital in a bona fide enterprise in the United States. So it has to be already set up, but you have to, have a substantial amount of investment. So the question is, what does that mean? We recommend that the investment be somewhere in the range of $75,000 or above. At some point, there was a figure that was $50,000. And so that used to be kind of recommended by people, but now things have changed. Obviously the higher the better, the more substantial, you could argue, the amount of capital is. And you have to be seeking to enter the US to either develop or direct the investment enterprise. So there are two ways. You could either as an individual say look, I want to start a restaurant, this is my business plan, this is my bank account, I'm putting in my money, or I have this loan that is, I'm using my personal assets as collateral. And so you could either do this as an individual or a company. A company could also send someone on an E2, but the company would need, at least 50% ownership of the company would have to be from the treaty country. So it would have to be on one of those countries on the list. So this often happens when there's a small business abroad from an E2 country, and they want to send some of their leadership to the US to start up a US branch, or to send, you can send more than one person on the E2. You can send up to 3 people 2 years at a time. And, as long as you, and I won't go over like all the criteria, but, they're on the website, obviously. But this is done on a pretty frequent basis. I would say it's a solid way, if it is an option for you to consider developing your idea with. Our next topic is entrepreneur parole, and I haven't seen too many of these at all. In fact, I polled a bunch of people. I think we've seen maybe like 4 between a bunch of firms that I kind of like asked. And I think there's just so few of them because the requirements are so high. And I think if you meet these requirements, you probably also would meet a requirement in some other area, and it would be more practical to just go another route. So for entrepreneur parole, you would have to have started a company within the last 5 years and have obtained an investment from a qualified investor for at least $250,000, or at least $100,000 grant or award from the government. Or if you don't have those, at least you have compelling evidence that you have lots of potential for rapid growth and job creation. So there's obviously like a lot of room for argument there. I would highly recommend you look at the form and the instructions for this, or any other visa for that matter. Like any visa type will have like the actual form that you have to fill out. And so if you go through all those questions, and you'll know exactly what they're looking for. But you have to own at least 10% of the business. And if you are granted it, which some people have, they give it to you for 2.5 years, and it can be extended. You have to show that it's going to benefit the public. And one other benefit too is that your spouse gets work authorization. Although on the flip side, you also have to show that you meet 400% of the federal poverty guidelines, which right now for 2 people, for a household of 2, it's about $81,000 and change. So I guess at least if you don't have a lot of salary on your end, at least your spouse can help make up for that if you're married. Some of the issues with entrepreneur parole, other than those high requirements to begin with, especially if you're just starting out, right, and trying to set everything up, is you have to apply at a port of entry. And so you can't change your status from the US. You actually have to leave and have them let you in. And when you apply, and after you apply for the application, so like you apply here and then you have to leave. So you're like applying multiple times, so to speak. And the application that you sent to USAS, it faces such long delays that I think it's really just people have an idea now, they want to pursue it now. They don't want to wait, months and years for this. So the applications are reviewed on the same group of people that review the EB-5 applications, which have a huge, very high bar, and there's a lot of fraud involved with that. So it said that they seem to be applying their strict approach to reviewing the EB-5 applications to entrepreneur parole. So a lot of the issues with immigration, as you know, is that the laws don't really change, but the interpretation sometimes changes, and like the individual officers and how they adjudicate things, they are often not consistent. And so it has discouraged, I think, a lot of people. And some evidence that's required might be difficult to obtain, such as so to have that, to show that you received the $250,000 from a qualified investor. It might be difficult to know like what are the nationalities of the investors, and especially if it's a group that is giving that to you. So there's just a lot of little details with this, but that's just at least an overview. The one that provides the most flexibility, as you probably all know already, is your F1 OPT. You can be self-employed. There's no salary requirement. It is only 12 months, but I think this is a time that would be great to use in your venture. And the problem, though, is that on STEM OPT, it's really not recommended that you do it. I mean, most people would say that it doesn't work on STEM OPT. A company, if you have a STEM field and you qualify for STEM OPT, then the company that you're going to do the OPT, the STEM OPT with, it has to be E-verified, and you have to have a training plan, and like, how are you working on the training plan? If you're just training yourself, it doesn't really work. So it would have to be, I think, a bigger venture at that point for it to work. But it might be, I mean, maybe it's worth discussing with somebody, but I just don't see how that could work for the great majority of people. And so the one that we see in the news all the time is the H-1B visa. The most common pathway I see for people in general, not entrepreneurs specifically, is just, someone's here on the F1. They find someone to work with that they want to work with, that gives them a job offer, and that person sponsors them or submits them into the lottery on an H-1B, and then they're here on the H-1B, and then from the H-1B, then there's the green card. That's the most common scenario, of course. The issue is that there is a quota, and so with the quota comes a lottery, and every March now, the employers submit the names of people that they want to sponsor in the lottery, or that are hoping would be selected in the lottery. And there's been, I mean, our acceptance rate this year was about 30%. I think it's been around 30% for the last few years. There are just so many applicants. And they all, everyone just seems so qualified all the time. It is completely random. Like, I've had people try 3 times and not get it, and then other people, try once and they do. So you just never know when it's going to happen. But if you do end up, while you're thinking and dreaming, if you do end up, getting someone to submit you into the lottery, make sure, if you are working with someone, make sure that in January you ask them, can you submit me into the lottery? Because for someone to submit you in March, they have to start planning a little earlier than that. And the lotteries have been running, sometime in late March. This year I think it was like around the 22nd of March that they ran. The entry, they give you about like a week or 10 days to submit the names, and then they run the lottery, and because it's all electronic. And then a few days later, they start releasing, the results little by little. And so it, caused a lot of uproar, but now it's, calmed down again, everything. Everything was all set. Although sometimes they will find like duplicates sometimes, or people that are submitted this, if they submit the same person with the same company, like that, those people get removed. So they probably will select more names sometime in the summer, probably, if not everyone applies on time, or if they don't do everything they're supposed to. There's always some that don't, and so USCIS has been actually good in releasing more numbers when they see that not everyone has used theirs, basically. And so the general requirements are, you're sponsored by a US employer, and you have to have a bachelor's degree. The job that you're taking has to be related to your degree. So that, the way that immigration works is like there are specific boxes, and they try to fit you in that box, right? And the problem now, in our complex world, and there's so much interdisciplinary work, there's marketing, and specific to biology, and there's so many combinations of things that sometimes the government doesn't quite view things in that way. So that sometimes is a challenge, but someone, an attorney would make sure that it's all related and viable before they would file. And then you have to meet this Department of Labor wage requirements. So there are, every year, the Department of Labor publishes, rough wage levels for people in different job categories. Even though there's a million types of jobs, there's like a few hundred, categories that they try to fit everybody in, right? And now, in fact, they're actually removing their wages from the website. There's an OFLC website where all the wages are published. They're going to move that now to, like, you have to log in to see the wage. We're not exactly sure how that's going to work. So I don't know why they're not making it like visible anymore. But anyway, we've heard about that. We'll see what happens. But essentially, you need to meet those requirements, and someone has to sponsor you. Now, for an entrepreneur, the question is, can you be self-employed on this? And a lot of people say no. technically speaking, I mean, if you have a device which would allow someone else at the company to, and the company itself to sponsor you, and you would not be reviewing your own work, someone else would be accountable for your work and theoretically be able to terminate you or review your work, supervise you, then it could be an option. I know people do use the H-1B, but I think you would have to really carefully figure out how to set up your company and to do that, through a board of directors. I know I was reading that some of the evidence that you may submit to demonstrate the distinction between your ownership interest and the right to control your employment includes term sheet, capitalization table, stock purchase agreement, investor rights agreement, voting agreement, organization of documents, and operating agreements. So I think you would, state clearly that you're one of the founders or owners, but then show that, through this other evidence that, you also, someone else also controls your work. I think USCS might challenge it. I would expect an RFE on it, but it is out there, and I know people have been successful in it. So just reviewing briefly some of the benefits of the H-1B. It allows for dual intent. If you get selected in the lottery, you can always change employers, and you can recapture your time spent abroad. If you are on F1 OPT, it can cover the gap between the end of the OPT and then the start of the H-1B, which the H-1B can be difficult, by the way, if you're not an OPT and someone wants to sponsor you, they need you now. Well, even if you get in the lottery, the H-1B only starts October 1st of every year. So then it can be like 6 months before you start, right? And so that's not something people want. So there are like strange timeline things you have to think about here. I want to make sure I have time for everything, but there is also cap exempt employment on H-1B. And I know that's when these global entrepreneur and residence programs come in, where they kind of serve as an affiliate to the university, and you can apply for the H-1B through those programs. And so or for like professor is the classic example, right? Where you could have an H-1B and you don't need to be in the lottery because it's affiliated, you're being employed by university or these entrepreneur and residence programs. You are, your H-1B is being applied through, because of the affiliation agreement that they have with the university.
Lena, before you go to L1, I have one question. So if your H1 gets picked in March and in October your H1 gets filed, right? In between the 6 months, any employer can change the job.
You mean, so when your name gets submitted into the lottery, you don't actually, I don't think that any job title was included in it. It's just asks for like name, passport number, whether or not you have a master's or a bachelor's degree, so that they know whether there's like the slight difference between the master's and the bachelor's level. That I guess if you have a master's degree, you have like a slightly higher chance to get the H-1B. But, I've seen people with masters not get it, and bachelor's people get it. I mean, it's just they reserve 20,000 of those numbers. So you can technically change the job. The job can change, but I guess whatever you apply for, usually you need to apply like within, I think it's 60 days after you're selected. You have to apply for the H-1B. So hopefully they know what job exactly you are. They're going to sponsor you for. But you can apply and then you can amend the job later on. Like say if the job location changes or if the job itself changes significantly, like they could always apply for the H-1B and then later on file an amendment. Or you could change the employers, but you have to do that after October 1st, otherwise it won't work.
Okay. And one more question. Yeah. After 3 chances of your H1, for example, your H1 don't get picked in 3 chances, then do we have any other things which is lined up? Like if your H1 doesn't get picked in 3 chances, you need to go back to your country, or is there any option available for that also?
As long as an employer is able is willing to submit, the lottery for you as long as they're willing to submit you in the lottery, there's no limit to the number of chances that you get. You could be abroad and they could still submit you, right? But it's a separate thing whether you have status here while that's going on. You would need to be maintaining your status. I mean, I know some people, if some people re-enroll in another degree program, or I know there's like day one CPT, which we generally don't recommend, but I do see it work for some people. Yeah, it is very tricky, like what
Yeah.
what other options there are. There are not a lot, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So it's the kind of thing where obviously people are very nervous and anxious about trying to get an employer to sponsor them while they're on OPT.
Makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
So the L1, and I want to make sure I get to my green card, so I'm going to have to talk fast. The L1s are generally for people that have worked for 1 year out of the last 3 years for a company abroad. So usually it's the classic case is a multinational company like Pfizer. You worked for the company in the UK and now you're getting transferred to the US. And it's either a manager or a specialized knowledge capacity. And even though there are very detailed requirements for those and things and documents you can show, right? What's relevant for entrepreneurs is this L1A new office. So if you start the enterprise abroad and you work there as an executive or a manager for at least one out of the last 3 years, you can try to set up a new office here. You need to show office space. You need to show proof, that they're doing business abroad and that you have something set up here. Maybe like contracts that you have with, services you might provide, or that you're entering the US as an executive or manager. So you have to, they're looking for very detailed job description documents, corporate chart of like how the companies are related. I've seen L1A cases that lead to EB1C multinational executive or manager green card cases. So a lot of times, in fact, sometimes people are here in one position, and sometimes they send them abroad on purpose. Like if it is a big company, sometimes they send them abroad for a year, especially if you face like a big backlog. Like if you're an Indian national, sometimes they send you abroad on purpose. Like we're sending you to Germany so you can like be an executive there for a year, and then you'll come back and we'll file your EP1C, because the EB1C is kind of similar to an L. I mean, I don't want to say similar, but it's the equivalent of an L, but a green card case. So much higher bar. You have to show that you control and you're an executive and can control a lot of the finances of the company, make a lot of big decisions for the company. But I know some people use that as a strategy. But in the short term, for an entrepreneur, if you start something abroad and you want to open up a new office here, you can see if that could potentially be an option for you. The other avenue is the O1. So this is also kind of like on an extraordinary level where you can be in different fields. A lot of being in the Boston area, a lot of people are in the sciences and in biology, cancer research. You have to show a lot of documents. You have to show you have to show that it's kind of like a gut instinct, like when is it O1 level. You have to show that you're highly accomplished in your field. It's usually at least a few years after graduation, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. I know some of the most common ways that we show something would be for business, at least for business people, is has or will command a high salary. That can be very objective. Like, look, I had this high salary. It's 30 or 40 or 50% or 300% times higher than the average for this type of role, because people really wanted me. Leading a critical role in distinguished organizations. So if you led a few organizations, if you're a business person and you were able to increase sales significantly or do a lot of great work for a company, you can show that they want you to meet at least 3 of these criteria. And not only that, but they want you to to show that it's like sustained over time, and like overall it would, you know, it's it used to be, you show 3 criteria and that's it, but they kind of heightened the bar a few years ago, and they want you to show like sustained over time, and that you're at the top of your field, basically. And so you kind of like have to argue. We try to argue everything possible. I mean, I know some people have their, images on magazine covers, and or like some kind of media attention, like if you have a newspaper articles about you, definitely save them. You never know if this might be something that can help you in the future. Your mom might save them, right? I know I've had people like call their parents, like, "Mom, I need the copy of that magazine that you saved." And so I won't go over this because I'm running kind of short on time, but there's also artists, right? You could have an agent that could sponsor you as an artist. So if your area of expertise is like, if you are creative at all, that maybe there could be an O1 case for you. Like I've done like artists, like fine artists, and we've had like the art, like some curators, just serve as the agent, even though they're not an official agent, you can. So for O1s, you can't self-petition, but similar to the H-1B, if you can show through a corporate device that someone else is reviewing your work and has the ability to, pay, hire, fire other employees, then it could potentially work. People have used this stuff for sure, as a way of, but you still have to meet all those criteria, right? So it's that's, I think, the challenge, finding that balance. And there must be work available, so it's not like speculative, like we're thinking about, doing something. No, you have to have like very specific things that you're working on. And you also need to disclose your ownership interests. So they, I would expect RFEs on that too. I would make things as clear as possible, what the setup is. So moving on to the green cards, we have employment-based, family-based, diversity, and investment. So the investment side is the EB-5, which we don't deal with. In fact, most immigration attorneys don't, because ethically speaking, you need to be able to provide financial advice, do the EB-5s. And what happens is your malpractice insurance goes up so much when you say that you do them. So most people don't. There's also some fraud involved in it, and like you hear like things on the news about the investments going through, and it is such a big investment. They're looking at $1 million investment. It doesn't apply to most people anyway. If that is something you want to do, I would just use caution and finding a reputable place to do it. The diversity lottery, if you are from a nationality where you can apply, I would definitely encourage that every year. It doesn't conflict, entering your name into that lottery doesn't conflict with any type of visa status, because it's only a lottery. It's not actually applying for anything. So definitely look into that. Family-based, if you, the classic case, if you're married to a US citizen, or if you're engaged, that can definitely lead to a green card. In fact, that can cure, if you marry a US citizen or a green card holder, that could cure like any deficiencies in your visa status. If you're ever out of status for a short amount of time, or something like that, or violated your status, that can actually cure it. Then there's the employment-based areas, which I will cover. So there's, the reason why there's backlogs is you have only a certain number of visas given, immigrant visas, which are green cards, given per year. And so no more than 7% of green cards can go to any one country. So, in particular, India and China, have backlogs. India in particular, obviously. And so you look at your priority date, and usually when you look at your priority date and what your preference category is, and then you check the visa bulletin. They come out every month with the visa bulletin, and you check, how long things are taking. Right now, they're taking a long time. So you have like the EB1, EB2, EB3, or what is, goes by, the EB1s are the highest, professional, multinational managers and executives, the outstanding professors or researchers. The EB1s would be kind of like the business the outstanding business people. You sold a multi-million-dollar company, and you're on the cover of Forbes, that kind of thing. And then you have like the other perm labor certification categories, like the EB2, the EB3. And yeah, those are what category you are in is based on what you apply for or what your background is. So the EB2 would be at least a master's degree or a bachelor's and 5 years of experience. And then the EB3 would be a bachelor's and less than 5 years of experience. And so the way that your priority date is determined is either the day, for EB2 and EB3 applications is the date that your perm or labor certification was filed, assuming it gets approved. That whole system, by the way, they updated the way that perms are they're filed in a different system now, and no one's gotten an approval yet. So I'm sure there'll be like updates to the system when it does, but we're crossing our fingers that everything is okay. And then the EB1, NIW, EB5 applications, that priority date is based on when your I-140 was filed, and so you can actually self-sponsor for certain categories. So the EB1 category, as well as the national interest waiver. And a lot of times the national interest waiver has a slightly lower bar. It is EB2 though, so it might not work for everyone. If you face a big backlog, people try to go into the EB1 category, but it is these are ways. For business people, you're really talking the EB1A and the national interest waiver. It doesn't really work unless you're an outstanding researcher, I guess. It doesn't really work for EB1B. In my opinion, at least it wouldn't be the most efficient way. So for the extraordinary ability, you have to meet 3 criteria. So it's sort of similar to the O1, but like a much higher level. You want to be able to provide either a one-time achievement, or you have to meet at least 3 criteria. And I won't list them here, but basically it's the most prestigious level. You use a lot of the same kind of documents, for the O1, for instance. Like, do you have media attention? What are your accomplishments? Sometimes it doesn't really fit into any one category, but perhaps you won a prize, or sometimes especially if you have a science background, if you have a PhD and you have a lot of citations, publications, you might be able to work all of that out and sort of connect it to whatever your project is, whatever your business is. And I would definitely encourage, if you have a science background, to do it that way. Even in your mind, if you think it's like completely separate, if there's a way to join it together somehow and present it that way, I think it would help. For some reason, USCIS loves the science category. It's just a little bit more objective and out there. If you have those publications, if you have those citations, it's different than just getting people to write a letter. To them, anyone can sort of write a recommendation letter, right? But if you publish something, there's no question. Or if you've written a book or like a book chapter, sometimes those are other ways. The national interest waiver, some of the same documents are used, for O1, EB1, or national interest waiver. Some of the same accomplishments, I guess, right? You have your set of accomplishments, whatever's on your CV, and then it's all about like which category matches, better your goals. One, and what do you qualify for, and what are your goals? And but the criteria is different for each one, right? So the national interest waiver is more about, is it possible to is it worth it for them to bypass the whole labor certification process? Are you so accomplished that you should be here and bypass that whole process of recruiting for the job and seeing if there's any qualified workers? And so we don't need to do that because you're so accomplished and you're going to provide such a benefit to the country, right? So these are the new as of like 4 or 5 years ago, or criteria for the NIW, right? And almost anyone can argue their field is intrinsically important and that you're well positioned. I think the difficulty or the challenge, I guess, is showing that you're well positioned to advance the proposed endeavor. And for business people, I think it would be a combination of, a very good business plan with showing that you have a lot of credentials or perhaps past experience. For example, we had someone that was highly accomplished in their field. A lot of their projects, they happened to be like in the architecture type of space, and a lot of their projects like won awards, even though they weren't the only person that worked on them. Still, like, it had the name of the firm that they were with, won awards, that was recognized nationally like many times. And so they had some kind of idea that sort of was related to that, and they wanted to apply, and they had a business plan. They had, obviously, like, kind of distinguished people sort of backing them up. And so the NIW could be a good approach for a business case. Although, because it's an EB2 category, if you're very backlogged, it might not be the best option for you. I mean, but it is there if you don't face that backlog. So again, these are some of the criteria or some of the evidence that is used for this. And I'm going to punch through because I think I'm like nearing where I need to go. But the other option is the PERM, the labor certification process. And I think the issue, the same with the H-1B, with the O-1, how are you going to do a PERM for yourself, even if you are, on the application itself, it asks, do you own any interest in the company, or are you related? Like, are you a relative of anyone that is? And so the question is, I think they would heavily scrutinize if you do file a labor certification. I would not say that it's impossible, but in fact, we once had someone that got an E1 visa. So the company abroad had started, a branch here in the U.S., but then this branch started a separate company, and then they were here on an E1, even though it's not a dual intent visa. A lot of these visas, there's this concept of dual intent. Like, should you have the intent to have a green card while you're on certain visa types, right? Like the H-1B and the L allow for it, but the F-1, J-1, the E visa, they don't really account for dual intent. So you have to be very careful. If you travel, like, what is your intent? Or, you shouldn't be filing like a green card case right after you travel on some of these other status. But this company had set up a separate company and said, that other company, we want you to work for that other company. And they did the PERM, and it's a slow and steady process. A lot of immigration now is very slow and steady. And eventually they did file a PERM for them. So it is possible to be an entrepreneur and to have a PERM filed, but it's very tricky if you own a company and if it's not large enough, or if you own like a large part of the company. I think it can be very tricky. So definitely, discuss it with somebody, I would say. I won't go too much over this criteria, but it's basically they advertise for the job, they see if anyone qualifies, they file the application. It's multiple steps. It's taking more than 2 years right now. So it's not something quick by any means, but at least when they file a PERM, that's when your priority date gets set in. So, immigration this year, right now, what we're looking at is processing times are extremely delayed. Ever since COVID, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And not only on the state side, but also on the consular side. Business immigration is not a priority for this administration, or for anyone by that matter. It always gets, set aside. A lot of things get brought up, but no solutions. Maintenance of status work authorization is carefully reviewed. That's always the case, right? But we have seen an uptick a little bit in RFEs for some reason. They want to see like your whole history. So definitely one piece of advice would be maintain your documents. I know you all are, but occasionally, like one time I actually had someone go through an EB1 case that was actually very challenging, and she got it, and then only to get denied because she was like missing one I-20. And it didn't make any sense because like they keep all of your they keep it, but for some reason they expect you to just hand it to them on a silver platter, like here's all my documents, even though it's all in my file, but they don't want to, I guess, bother looking for it. She ended up like finding it actually, so we were able to overturn her denial, but it was very stressful. So one thing you can do is just make sure you keep all of your documents just organized in a folder and don't throw anything away, don't lose anything. Pray that there's no like fire or anything. Um, so yeah, travel is a concern, because the consulates. I mean, I've heard some consulates are like backlogged 2 years. Um, Recently at a conference, they were saying that they don't prioritize visas; they prioritize U.S. citizen services. So when tourists lose their passport and that kind of thing, or run into issues, that's what their primary focus is, and like visas are secondary to them. And so that causes some problems, obviously, and backlogs. And also, they don't. I think they were saying that like their training on visas is like 2 weeks long, which is not nearly enough. So there's sometimes a lot of issues that come with that. And um, at least they tested out a very narrowly, stateside visa stamping, for Indian nationals. That was something that they looked into. Not a lot of people qualified for that because it was like so narrow, but they tested it out, and hopefully something can come down the line. They might hopefully bring that back, which would be so helpful to so many people. And green cards right now are a huge problem because the visa bulletin is backlogged for everyone. I mean, I think it's like at least a year out for everyone. So if you file something now, and you have to at least wait a year to file a green card. Um, and as of April 1st, immigration just increased fees for all visa types. So everything is just so expensive now, way past the inflation numbers. And I think they're trying to justify all their backlogs, but yeah, so it's more expensive, taking more time. I know this. Uh, it's a challenge right now, but yeah, I was just telling Helly and Rohan that we lose sleep so that so that you can hopefully sleep more. But um that concludes my topic. I will bring it over to you guys.
Thank you so much, Lena. Uh, Rohan is there, as Rohan will take over next.
Yeah, thank you, Lena. So my portion of the presentation is to talk about entity choice selection. So once you, this portion won't touch on the visa component at all, but once you're in a position to start your own business, here are some options for you. And everything that I'll talk about and everything that Lena talks about was all for educational purposes only. And you should really talk to an attorney about your specific situation and your specific considerations. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was that if any of you have any questions as I go through some of this material, you should feel free. I know Helly mentioned that you can mention it in the chat, and you're also more than welcome to just interrupt me at any time. I always do better when there's a little bit more dialogue rather than being didactic. So feel free to just jump in if you have any questions. But basically, so when I talk about entity choice selection, what I'm talking about are the vehicles, the entities that you can create to actually conduct business. And there are a couple of options that you have. There are sole proprietors, general partnerships, limited liability partnerships, limited liability companies, and corporations. And in a minute, I'll put up a chart that helps, with some of those things across the top and some considerations on the left. But I'm going to spend most of my time talking about sole proprietorships, general partnerships, LLCs, and corporations. And because we have just a little bit of time, I'll just note a couple of, I think, common misconceptions and things that are helpful to to know going into entity selection that might help clarify some points as you go through the process. And the first thing that I'll mention is that when you're forming an entity, there are you're creating an entity under the laws of a state. And so when people talk about a Delaware corporation, they're forming a corporation under the laws, pursuant to the laws of Delaware. And so the corporation, it has to align with the laws of that state. And that's separate from the taxation of the entity. So you can form a company in one state, you can live in another state, and the IRS will recognize that entity. It could recognize that entity differently, or treat that entity differently than the way that you normally conceptualize it. And the primary example of this, I think, are LLCs. When you form a limited liability company, you're forming that based on a statute in a state. So you can look up, the Massachusetts Limited Liability Company Act or Delaware's Limited Liability Company Act, and you can form that entity, but the IRS doesn't recognize the LLC as its own entity type. And when you file your tax returns, you're filing those returns either as a partnership or you can elect for corporate status or corporations treatment as a corporation. So that's just one thing that I'll mention sort of at the top, because I think that understanding that is actually really helpful as we go through the types. So what I'll do is I'll present my screen, which just has just a quick chart. Okay, so what you're seeing is across the top are 5 different types of entities, and down the bottom, across the left, going down, are different considerations. And actually, let me just back up one step. In talking about some of the considerations, there are a number of factors that you might want to consider. Some of them include, the ease of formation, how liability is handled, and I'll discuss that in the next slide. Tax treatment, ownership structure, capital structure, management structure, and exit strategies. Those are typically the common considerations that you might want to make when you're making a selection about what type of entity to form. The ones that come up the most are tax treatment and ownership and management structure. So moving on to the chart, let's say you as an individual decide to start transacting business, and let's say you decide to shovel snow and earn money. What you've done effectively is you have created a sole proprietorship, and you are a single individual that is engaging in some business for profit, and you haven't really done anything to do that. There's little to no startup cost. The downside is that, let's say you are shoveling someone's driveway and you damage their property, you are unlimited. Your liability for those damages is unlimited and it's personal. And so there's no separation, there's no entity separation between you and the business. You are the business. And so for that reason, liability protection is actually an important kind of issue with sole proprietorships. Another common maybe not misconception, but an important topic that comes up sometimes is, if you are, let's say you and a friend decide to engage in business for profit, simply by agreeing to do that, you've already created a general partnership. And so what that means is that now you are two or more individuals in a general partnership, and each of you are have unlimited liability for everything that goes on in that business. So let's say your friend is shoveling snow on someone's driveway and they damage that property. Not only are they have unlimited liability, but you also have unlimited liability because you're in that partnership, that general partnership. So those are just kind of two quick things about liability. It is somewhat easy to set up an entity that creates a layer of protection and a layer of liability protection. And I think that the easiest way to do that would be to form an LLC. LLCs are very easy to create. You can file with the Massachusetts Secretary of the Commonwealth for $500 and form an LLC. And you'll have the limited liability protection. You'll form an entity. That entity's income will have pass through taxation to you, or you can elect for corporate status with the IRS. And LLCs are advantageous because they have very flexible ownership structure. You can be a single member manager of your LLC. You can have multiple members. You can have multiple managers. You can have different ownership structure, membership interests that make it a little bit easier for you to form an entity that meets your needs. While that's advantageous, it can get complicated. And those agreements, the operating agreement for an LLC is called an operating agreement. And that is the document, that's the primary agreement that the members and managers will use to run the business. And it's sort of like the document that sort of determines how the LLC is governed. LLCs can be, and so they can vary in complexity. For corporations, and I know we only have like a minute, corporations can be a little bit more complicated to set up. So for example, I put a list of the items that you would need to form a Delaware corporation. You would need your articles of incorporation. Those get submitted to the Secretary of the State in Delaware, or if you're forming a Massachusetts corporation, you would have to submit those to the Secretary of the Commonwealth. You have bylaws that, and so articles of incorporation, basically, you are authorizing a certain number of shares, you're setting the par value for those shares, and you will have various provisions in those articles about how the entity transacts, similar to an operating agreement, but this one is submitted to the state, and we'll talk about things like different shares that have been authorized, the protective provisions of those shares, voting rights of those shares, preferences for those shares, things that are typically negotiated when you're doing a fundraising if you're forming an entity for the purpose of raising money. In addition, you have your bylaws, which are the internal governance document. You have various consents. You have documents that manage the relationship amongst shareholders. And then you have various agreements about the shares themselves. Maybe they're restricted stock, or you can offer options to employees or service providers. And then in our standard packet, we also provide documents that help the entity protect their intellectual property. Going back to the choice of entity stuff, the corporation, while on its face might seem more complicated, it does give you a very kind of structured way of forming your entity. And if you're going to be raising outside money, I think one important guidepost that might be helpful for you to think about and to keep in the back of your mind is that you never really want your formation documents, your entity documents to be complicated or nuanced, because typically you're working with, you never really want your governance documents to be the thing that holds up a transaction or holds up a fundraise. And typically what we'll do is we'll use standard documents and standard corporate structures so that there aren't any surprises for outside investors or for the individuals who are actually principals of the business. So I know I'm running over. I know it's 7:02. So I'm just going to kind of pause there and see if we have any questions or have any kind of burning items that you might want to talk about before wrapping up.
So Rohan, right now nobody have questions. So if you want to continue on important things, you can carry on.
I can carry on, but I also need to leave. So
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
And I just want to respect everyone's time for this session.
Sorry, I took so long. Yeah.
Oh, no worries at all.
No.
Very good.
Maybe go through the slides really quick because it is being recorded, right? So perhaps at least that could give some.
Yes.